shall make us free. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe truth shall make us free someday. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe truth shall make us free someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.
Good evening. Good evening, welcome, and thank you for coming. My name is Catherine Russell Brown. I'm the wearer of at least 2 hats. Tonight I am the director of the Center for the Study of Race and Race Relations here at the University of Florida, and also professor of law at the Levin College of Law here at the University of Florida. I'm very excited that tonight has finally arrived. We're anxiously awaiting and looking forward to the talk this evening by Dr. Patricia Stephens Due and attorney John Due. The theme for this evening is collaboration. From inception to fruition, tonight's evening with the Dues is the result of a group effort. In 2007, my mother and I read the book Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. In riveting, powerful detail, the book tells the story of civil rights activism here in Florida and across the nation. The book was co-written by one of our guests this evening, Dr. Patricia Stephens Due, along with her daughter, Tanana Reed Due. Reading this book planted the seed for tonight's event. These seeds began to take root last spring when we decided that the Race Center should plan an event where we could hear firsthand testimony on the life and life lived and the fight for civil rights. Tonight's event sprouted when we joined with the University of Florida's Samuel Proctor Oral History Program to put on this event. I sent Dr. Ortiz an email on April 17th of last year to ask if his center would be interested in co-sponsoring this event. His response came back in less than 20 minutes, an enthusiastic thumbs up. As luck would have it, Dr. Ortiz already knew this evening's speakers and was able to use his mighty powers of persuasion and enlist others to do the same to get them to say yes. From the beginning, both centers wanted to make this a campus and community event. I'm thrilled to say that we exceeded even our own expectations. This event has a total of 14 co-sponsors: the Bob Graham Center for Public Service, the Office of the Provost, the George A. Smathers Libraries, Center on African Studies, the Center for Women's Studies and Gender Research, the African American Studies Program, the Department of Anthropology, the Department of History, the Office of the Provost, and the speech, that I mentioned, and the speech and debate team. And our community co-sponsors, the 1199 SEIU United Healthcare Workers East Florida Region, the alumni of the North Star Leadership Council, the Gainesville Women's Liberation, and the Civic Media Center. A special thank you to Melissa Bamba, the Assistant Director of the Race Center, and Tamara Jenkins, the Office Manager of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, and Marna Weston, the African American History Project Coordinator. Before passing the baton to Dr. Ortiz, I'd like to share a statement made by Nelson Mandela, former South African president, in prison for 27 years for his political activism. He says, "In the heart of any individual, family, community, or society, memory is of fundamental importance. It is the fabric of identity. At the heart of every oppressive tool developed by the apartheid regime was a determination to control, distort, weaken, even erase people's memories. The struggle against apartheid can be typified as the pitting of remembering against forgetting. Tonight we toast to remembering our history. Thank you for coming, and we look forward to an engaging evening. Take notes, ask questions, and join us in future events." Dr. Paul Ortiz.
Thank you so much, Dr. Russell Brown. Good evening.
Good evening.
It is a great honor for us at the University of Florida to be able to welcome Dr. Patricia Stephens Due and attorney John Due. And I'd like us all to give a warm Gainesville and U.S. welcome to these two Johns. Catherine mentioned at the outset, this is really a dream come true for us at the University of Florida and certainly at the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Patricia Stephens Due and John Due have made this country a better place to live in. Their lives of struggle have made it easier for all of us to relate to each other with greater honesty and candor across divides of race, creed, and color. To call Patricia Stephens Due and John Due pioneers of the civil rights movement would be an understatement. Their endeavors in pursuit of justice have made it easier for women to live lives of dignity, for workers to organize unions, and for African Americans to claim their rightful place in this republic. The Dues will be the first to tell you that they were not the first to join the centuries-old Black freedom struggle. And I think they are going to tell you this evening that they hope not to be the last. We all know that there is much work to be done. A former student of mine who is a first-year law student at Berkeley wrote me this email just this morning. She reports, quote, "At Berkeley Law, only 5 of the 270 first-year students are Black males, and only 1 is from California. The numbers do not get much better for Chicano males," she reports. This disturbing correspondence makes the event this evening all the more important. We need role models in creating social movements for equality. The Dues provide us with critical examples to emulate and to learn from. Indeed, the way they have lived their lives and work evoke for us the words of C.L.R. James when he said, quote, "Let all true believers in democracy and equality today strengthen ourselves by studying what they did and how they did it." So there are many individuals, departments, and community organizations that pull together resources, time, and energy to make this event possible. Catherine read us the list. And of course, first of all, I want to thank Catherine again for sending that email, for having the idea. It's been such an honor for us at the Oral History program to be able to work with the Center for the Study of Race and Race Relations, and we want to collaborate more in the future. Catherine was the originator of the idea for this program. She organized planning meetings that lasted and went all through the summer on a bi-weekly basis. There's a myth that professors don't do anything in the summer, right? Catherine is a living testimony to the contrary. She's very busy, like most of us are as well. In addition, we're very grateful for our support from the Bob Graham Center for Public Service. The Graham Center is live streaming this event, and what this means is that we have a national audience, an international audience for this event. We've had friends call us from Hawaii, from California, from Texas, who are actually watching us right now, thanks to the expertise and support of the Bob Graham Center. So I want to give them a hand. In fact, right now, there's another audience of folks watching us downtown at the Civic Media Center. I also want to acknowledge the Civic Media Center because we know there are many folks who live in downtown Gainesville. Their idea of an exciting activity isn't always to try to park at the UF campus in the evening. So we're very grateful to our friends at the Civic Media Center for hosting a live streaming portion. I also want to take this opportunity to thank UF President Bernie Machen and Provost Joe Glover, whose commitment to African American history has allowed the Oral History program to embark upon a 3-year research project to gather, preserve, and promote the oral histories of African Americans in Alachua County and beyond. I'd also like to thank the Magnolia Plantation Bed and Breakfast in Gainesville for providing excellent lodging and accommodations for the Dews. And I just have 2 quick administrative announcements to make. When you receive your program, there is an insert. There are 2 pieces of paper. One of them, I'm told, is yellow. One of them is blue. Now, the survey form is on kind of a light blue paper. We'd really appreciate if you would take the time to fill that out. It gives us a sense of what we're doing well, what we need to improve upon, and we're giving you a bit of an incentive tonight to fill that out. If you fill it out and turn it into one of our staff and kind volunteers who are kind of standing on the outside, staff volunteers, raise your hands. You will be entered into a drawing to win a signed copy of Freedom of the Family. So that's a little incentive. And in addition, if you would like to ask Dr. Patricia Stephens Due or Attorney John Due questions this evening, we've included question cards on yellow pieces of paper. And as questions occur to you, you can fill out your question card. And again, if you can pass it to the outside, we'll have volunteers who will take your question card, and our kind moderators, who we're going to introduce in just a moment, will be administering that part of the program. Before I introduce our evening's moderators, I've been asked to make 2 quick announcements. One regarding the University of Florida's Black History Month program. Black History Month is proud to announce the 2nd annual all-campus intramural Great Gator Debaters Tournament, which will be held this Sunday, February 20th. Registration is open to all UF students. This year's topic, which I think this audience would be interested in, resolved the Civil Rights Act of 1964 should be reformed. It's a very interesting debate topic, certainly. For further information, you can contact the tournament director, Dominique Martin. Is Dominique here this evening, by the way? Maybe in the overflow area. The other announcement is that the UF Speech and Debate team is hosting the Florida Intercollegiate Forensics Association, and I think Mr. Martin Weston, if you're interested in that, you can talk with Martin about that. Before I turn the evening's program over to our dear moderators, Dan Farling and Zahara Simmons, Catherine and I wanted to make a joint announcement. Catherine.
We wanted to take just a moment to acknowledge and give a round of applause to those who are present who are civil rights veterans of the movement. So if you licked envelopes, if you went to meetings, if you organized meetings, if you rode buses, if you refused to get on a bus, if you
Did all those things and more.
All those things and more. We would like, you went to jail. We'd like you to stand up.
Now it's my great honor to be able to yield the podium to our two moderators this evening who will be in charge of the program from this point on. But I wanted to quickly introduce them. Both Dan Harmling and Zohar Simmons are longtime friends of Catherine and I, and they are also advisors of the oral history program. We really depend on their expertise and guidance. Dan Harmling, Dan has known the Due since around 1963. He remains very good friends with them. He states, and this is a direct quote, "I am very proud of my arrests during acts of civil disobedience at a segregated movie theater in Tallahassee in 1963, at a segregated restaurant in St. Augustine in 1964, at the Capitol building in Montgomery, Alabama, during the Selma to Montgomery March in 1965, and at a supermarket refusing to promote black employees in Jacksonville in 1966. And Dan, I believe there are more, but we'll stop there. Okay. Dan is also a retired school teacher and a member of the math department faculty at Santa Fe College. In 2010, the Martin Luther King Jr. Commission of Florida Incorporated presented Dan with a Hall of Fame Award Memorial Tribute, which is a program to honor those who fight for civil rights. Dan is our first moderator. Thank you, Dan. Our next moderator is Dr. Zohar Simmons. Dr. Simmons is an assistant professor in the Department of Religion and a faculty affiliate at the African American Studies program. She has a long history in the area of civil rights, human rights, and peace work. She was on the staff of the American Friends Service Committee for 23 years. The AFSC is a Quaker peace, justice, human rights, and international development organization headquartered in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. During her early adult years as a college student and thereafter, she was active with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and spent 7 years working full-time in voter registration and desegregation activities in Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama during the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Before I ask Dan and Zohar to come up here, make sure and turn off her cell phones and pagers and beepers and all those other things. Thank you so much. Dr. Simmons, Dan Harmling, please come up to the podium. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Good evening. Good to be here.
I believe you were going to introduce John first?
I'm going to introduce John, and you're going to introduce Patricia.
Right.
And I'm not sure there should be a coin flip. What do you think, John?
She should speak first.
Okay, so maybe
All right.
Zohar's going to go.
Okay. What a pleasure it is, first of all, to be here tonight and to thank the organizers and all of the sponsors for this, and to thank all of you for coming out. My goodness, how wonderful it is to look out and see this beautiful audience. You know, there is a fraternity of civil rights folks, and often in the class, civil rights class that I teach, I say, you know, one of the things that we're most proud of is how many times we went to jail and how long we stayed. I mean, you know, so one of the wonderful things you'll hear about Dr. Patricia Stephens Due is her long prison sentence. But anyway, I'm really happy to have the honor of introducing her to many of you and presenting her to others who already know her. She is a lifelong civil rights activist who took part in the nation's first jail-in as a college student in 1960, spending 49 days in jail rather than pay her fine for sitting at a Woolworth lunch counter. Due has never lost her commitment to the civil rights struggle, and her involvement in community problem solving spans over 4 decades. You've heard about this wonderful book, Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights, in which she and her daughter chronicle the price of activism, both on their family and on the families of other civil rights activists that they have known. Dr. Due was born in Quincy, Florida. She's a Florida girl, and spent her childhood in the Florida cities of Miami, Quincy, and Belle Glade. Now, when she was growing up, Florida did not allow so-called Negroes to eat with whites at dime store counters, also segregated its schools, its swimming pools, its movie theaters, and its restaurants. And really, blacks had very limited opportunities in employment and in housing. So as a teenager in Belle Glade, Dr. Due and her sister first defied segregation laws by standing at the white-only window at the Dairy Qyeen. As college students, when the sisters attended an interracial workshop in 1959, sponsored by CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, they were swept into what would later become known as the Civil Rights Movement. Dr. Due and her sister Priscilla Stephens Due were among 5 Florida A&M University students who spent 49 days in jail, as I mentioned, after taking part in a sit-in at a Tallahassee Woolworth in 1960. Due and the other students' decision to stay in jail as opposed to having bail brought her to the attention of Dr. Martin Luther King, who wrote to her and said, "You have again proven that there is nothing more majestic and sublime than the determined courage of individuals willing to suffer and sacrifice for the cause of freedom." So you will hear more from Dr. Due about her activities. I don't want to take any more time, but we welcome you to here with us today.
Before Patricia speaks, I'm going to give the introduction to John Due. John's daughter, Tananari Due, writes about her father in the book Freedom in the Family. Civil rights was all he wanted to do. After graduating from Indiana University in 1958 with a degree in government and sociology, and after 2 years working as a rehabilitation counselor with the Indiana prison system, John sensed his destiny. With the exception of 2 years in the Army, he had spent his entire life in Indiana. John knew the civil rights struggle needed lawyers. And he had read in 1960 about the 2 sisters in Tallahassee who served 49 days in jail, the nation's first jail-in, after a refusal to pay a fine for a sit-in at a Woolworth's lunch counter. So he headed south to the Florida A&M Law School, soon found those 2 sisters, and on January 5th, 1963, after getting his law degree and proving his serious commitment to the movement, John and Patricia Stephens, the younger of those 2 sisters, John and Patricia, married. On November 15th, 1963, John officially became a member of the Florida Bar. And 1 week later, he arrived in St. Augustine, Florida, taking his first official case. The defense of Dr. Robert Hailing, a respected dentist, the leader of that city's civil rights movement, the nation's oldest city, and a city Martin Luther King would later call the most violent he ever experienced in the civil rights movement. This was November 22nd, 1963, the day President Kennedy was assassinated. At a Ku Klux Klan rally that Dr. Hailing had gone to observe from a distance, he and two friends were discovered, dragged to the front of this racist mob and severely beaten. Now he was on trial for allegedly beating a couple of them. John successfully defended Dr. Hailing. On October 29, 1997, that's 34 years later, a week after John's 63rd birthday, an editorial in the Miami Herald said about him after he received one of his dozens of awards, quote, "Florida's and Dade County's history record Mr. Due as a courageous and selfless champion in the struggle for equality. He risked everything, life, family, and future, to secure rights enjoyed today by so many. I am so proud to introduce my very good friend, John Dorsey Due, Jr. John Dorsey.
Good evening.
Mike.
Thank you so much for both our introductions. You know, the foot soldiers were asked to stand or to raise their hands, but I have a few that I know personally, and a few people that we work with that I would like to stand. And wanted them to sit with me during the book signing, but even John was absent. Betty Wright Blakely, who is on the cover and who organized the Nellen Corps. And of course, Dan, who was so involved in the movement and later on with us. Dan, I know you introduced John, but will you stand? And thank you. We lived in Miami for about 35 years, raising our girls, and Miami has come to us this evening. Monica Russo, so please stand. Who represents labor, SEIU, $11.99. Thank you so much for coming, Monica. As I heard both our introductions, I realized that although Tanana Reeve and I wrote this book, it was because of many of you that we were able to make it happen. When I went on a book tour in 2003, one of the questions was, what took you so long? Well, life did. In addition to our activities, John and I are fortunate to have 3 daughters. Tanana Reeve, you've heard about. Tanana Reeve Due is an author and a screenwriter. Janita Due lives in Atlanta, is the senior counselor for CNN and chair of the diversity committee for CNN. Lydia Due Grice lives in McKinney, Texas. She's a Texas lawyer, and she formerly worked for the United States government. So we were paying attention. First and foremost to us, a family was important. I see I'm having to bend over a bit here.
Okay, let me move the chair a little bit.
He was always a gentleman. Thank you, honey.
Being facetious.
My name is Patricia Stephens Due, and I was born in Quincy, Florida. And my parents divorced when I was 4 years old. My mother set out for Miami to try to make a living for us. Now, my biological father wanted to remarry my mother, but unlike a lot of children, a little later on, I said, oh, please don't. At 9 years old, my mother remarried. Marion Murphy Hamilton. That was the best thing that ever happened to me. He was band director in Belgrade, and he taught me civics and social studies. And that was when and where I learned how I had a responsibility to be involved. My mother was a Democratic committee woman working in voter registration in the 50s. So we had all of this energy going in our family. I look at some of my high school yearbooks now. I see my mother sitting in the PTA meetings, band parent meetings. I was a trumpet player. People saying, oh, a trumpet player, and I was good. Really good. And I realized that you have to be where your children are. It's important to be involved in the community, but your first little community is your family. So in 1959, and I do have to drink a lot of water, and I'll tell you about that later because I think it's important for all of you to know. In 1959, we were in Miami visiting my biological father, and we were approached by a family friend to go to a CORE meeting. Well, we had never heard of CORE, so he said, if you go, I'll take you to dinner at Woolworth. That was on Miami Beach at the time, the only restaurant that would serve both blacks and whites. Well, that seemed interesting to us, so he bribed us to go to that meeting. But after we went to the CORE meeting and found out how we could make changes, CORE was a nonviolent, interracial, direct action group. First I had heard of it, although they were organized in 1942 at the University of Chicago's campus. My sister and I, Priscilla, were so excited, Betty, that when we got back to FAMU, now you weren't there then, when we got back to FAMU, we organized a CORE chapter. And we had tests. The first thing you had to test, you don't assume the place is segregated you or did not serve you because they happen not to serve. You always do testing, and then you negotiate to see if you can make a difference. Well, while we were just fairly new, February 1st, 1960, Greensboro, North Carolina, A&T College, it started. 4 students went to the Woolworth lunch counter and were not served. Now, we didn't have the internet, but we had the grapevine. And we knew right away what had happened. Took us a while. It was February 13th before we had our first sit-in Tallahassee. We went in, we had books to read, there were hecklers there, people with a gun, and oh, you niggas go to the back. See, I don't sanitize history myself. They said niggers. So you niggas go to the back, and we just sat. And after a time, we left. Our next sit-in was February 20th, 1960, and this time it was different. And the waitress said, "Oh my God, here they come again." She didn't know what to do with us. We sat for a while, and then we were arrested and marched off to jail. And they walked us to jail because the jail was a renovated bank vault. And they asked us, who did you want to call? You want to call that nigger Reverend C.K. Steele? Now, two of Reverend Steele's sons, how many of you have heard of Reverend C.K. Steele? Well, his two older sons were also arrested. Henry Marion Steele and Charles K. Steele on that same day. 8 of us went on to jail. Eventually, 3 got out to start the appeals process. Okay, imagine that you are the courtroom. It's only the first 4 seating areas on both sides. White, colored, that's what we would call them. Our lawyers came all the way from Miami. And we had a black Attorney Graves eventually was one of our lawyers, and he was Negro, but they called him nigger in the courtroom. The trial was set for March 1st, but all 3,000, and don't laugh now, all 3,000 FAMU students, and it was 3,000 at that time, said they were not going to class on March 1st, but that they were going downtown to give us moral support. Well, when the authorities heard this, they postponed the trial, and the students continue, mostly FAMU, but some FSU students, continue to march downtown, continue to sit in, continue to call to negotiate. And after some more students had been arrested, we called the city, the county, the state, we called everyone to talk to us, let's discuss this. No one did. And as we marched 1,000 strong from the FAMU campus, crossing the railroad tracks, which was considered the dividing line between the so-called colored and white town. All these people who had refused to talk to us were there to meet us. And the police officer said to me, "I want you," and threw a tear gas bomb directly in my face. Well, for a moment, I could not see. I had never been tear gassed before. And some young man, and Betty, I still don't know who he is, some young man said, "Take my hand. I've been in the army. Take this handkerchief and don't rub your eyes." And he led me to a church right down from the FAMU campus. I couldn't see, but I could hear the screams of the students as the police threw tear gas bomb after tear gas bomb on these students. This was Tallahassee, Florida. This was the Paradise State. No, we weren't Mississippi, and we weren't Alabama. We weren't Georgia, as they like to say. But we were tear gassed, we were arrested again, and this time the trial date was reset for March 17th. There were 8 charges against us. They dropped 5 and kept 3. We don't even know what all 8 were. We were found guilty of what I still want to know, but some of us decided we would go on to jail. There was only one community person with us, Mrs. Mary Ola Gaines. I believe in calling names because if you have a name, you could have someone to call on to tell you the rest of the story. I didn't talk to Ms. Gaines for decades. I didn't even know why she was there. Eventually, I got around to interviewing her. I said, Mrs. Gaines, did they call you to let you know that we were going downtown and ask you to go sit with us? She said, they called me just to tell me. But no, they didn't ask me to sit. But I thought if you children, we were children then in her eyes, if you children could go and sit in and I live here, that's the least I can do. Now, when Mrs. Gaines was arrested, she chose not to go to jail. She said she didn't do anything wrong. She wasn't going to jail. But 5 of us did spend 49 days in the Leon County Jail for sitting in at a Woolworth lunch counter. The 5 included my sister Priscilla, assistant brother Team, John and Barbara Broxton, William Larkins, who was the incoming president of the Student Government Association. And I don't know, looking at the group here, the whites who participated thought they were free. For 2 weeks, they were allowed to come in and see us, and then they were told, you can't see them. So then they learned that they too were not free. So it wasn't just blacks who were told what to do. It was all of us. Then the ministers started coming 2 a day. Jackie Robinson got involved. He sent all of us diaries to keep while we were in jail. Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt got involved. She tried to raise money for those of us in jail and other students in the South. So there were a lot of people involved, but most of all, the people in Tallahassee were involved. Now, we mentioned that not only was I arrested in Tallahassee, I was arrested in Miami, Ocala, St. Petersburg, Florida now. And I was also arrested in New York in 1964 at the World's Fair because they were saying that Florida was a paradise, and we went there to let them know that it wasn't. So we were just picketing. I think Ferris Bryant was our governor then. And before we knew it, someone had climbed the orange. Oh, it was hundreds of feet tall, but it wasn't any of us, though. But they arrested all of us. My sister Priscilla had fled to New York. She thought she could move from place to place and avoid all the racism, but there was no avoiding it. I lost my sister because after she was arrested time and time again in New York for an arraignment, she left the country and she went to West Africa, and she was gone for decades. There were heavy prices to pay for the involvement of people, both blacks and whites. And I hate to mention it, but you have someone right here in Gainesville who paid a very, very heavy price. Dan was involved as a student at the University of Florida here. So was his brother Jim. But Jim could not take it when he was told one thing by university authorities and the actions said something else. Jim could not take it, so Jim committed suicide. We had many students who needed help, who needed attention in order to survive. But we didn't have the kind of system that you perhaps have today, Dr. Ortiz, where you have somebody available to talk with students and to help. And then, you know, Kathy wasn't just like, there was my good friend Judy Benninger Brown, a student here at the University of Florida. And when I was suspended, I guess Judy was suspended too, so we decided we would work for CORE in a voter registration project in 10 North Florida counties. And we are back in Quincy. That was the place where they shot at us in the office that we had, which is double as our home. And the Ku Klux Klan, the White Citizens Council came around threatening us all the time. And we could not get any help, city, county, state, or the FBI. Now I take that back. The FBI usually came around a week later. And we were pinned down in a building. Now I had a neighbor that lived next door, and he happened to have been my cousin. He said, they may be nonviolent, but I'm not nonviolent. So he would take his shotgun out. He said he had to protect his family. I know we've all been through a lot, but we can't let up because the struggle continues. And it's going to keep on. Gigi is 13 now. I certainly want a better life for her than we've had, than you've had, an easier life. We want that for all of our children, all of your children. In order to have this, you have to be involved. John and I live on about 5 acres now in Gaston County, and people ask us, why are you back? Didn't they treat you badly enough? And I wonder myself sometimes, why are we back? But the red clay is alluring, and the pine trees, and the oak trees, and the squirrels, and Sassy, the new Great Dane puppy we just got. Yeah. And thanks for taking care of Sassy for us. Thanks for arranging to have Sassy taken care of. We couldn't have come if we hadn't had a babysitter. Thank you. But seriously, it was not easy. Oh, I'm supposed to have 20 minutes. Oh, honey, I hope I didn't take all of yours. Usually I don't know. I don't adhere to the time factor. But I think the one thing, someone asked, what's the worst thing that happened to you after you became a mother? And I get very emotional. Even before with the tear gas, that was, I've had to wear dark glasses ever since that tear gas. But the most emotional thing that ever happened to me was when we moved from Quincy to Miami because we thought they had a better school system, Monica. What we found, because my mother worked, we had to take Tanana Reeve, who was 3 years old but ready for school, with us as we tried to find a home school for her. And they would say white only. And she was only 3, so she didn't understand that. To her, my mother was white because she was fair. She even thought I might have been a dark white person. So to her, it was only a matter of becoming white, and that was no problem. She got in her little bed and poured powder all over her body. And she said, Mommy, I'm white now. Will I be able to go to school? You know, that's terrible. And we have some of those same kinds of situations. We fight the same battles over and over again. You fight for a decent education, for your family, for your community, for your country. You fight so that people can live in harmony together, no matter what. You fight so that people can have jobs. And now here we are in 2011. We have more black young men in prison than in college. And of course, black unemployment has always been high. But in the last couple of years, white unemployment has been high. So we've taken a different look at things now. But we're still fighting for equal jobs. At this point, for jobs, health care, things people, everybody should be entitled to. Well, honey.
Yes, darling.
I talk more than my husband, but I'm going to give him an opportunity to say a few things, but I want all of you, I want to just thank you for making it possible to tell this story. And I can't believe that Jimmy has grown up, almost grown up, you know. These young people just grow up so quickly. And where is Mike? Thank you. Mike, you were with us too in Gaston County, and then you went to St. Augustine. I know Mike told me he doesn't hear that well, but we all have little problems now, but you were a foot soldier too. Thank you, and I'm sure there are others. So on behalf of our family, Tanana Reeve, Priscilla Due, Janita Patricia Due, and Lydia Charlotte Due, we want to thank you for coming because they are listening and they're going to say, Mom, Mom, why you have to say all of that? And but I'm glad they do have opportunity, as others do, to hear part of the story, and I'm going to let John talk so that we can have some questions later.
Can you hear me? Will Dr. Ortiz stand up, please? You notice his beard, his pigtail. You can sit down now. At the University of Florida. Dr. Nunn, will you stand too? We have to also commend you. I don't know, you had a haircut. This is important because, you can sit down too, because we have to thank the University of Florida for accommodating this process. Understanding the times that we are in here in America, it's good that the power structure understands that for its own survival, we had to have the Ortiz and the nuns to help save society. So thank you for being the sponsor of this thing. Okay, so Dr. Russell Brown, where are you? There you are. You're in charge of the Institute. And I'm so happy that you do more than teach African dances. Oh, I don't want to, step on somebody's feet. Oh, okay, but what I'm trying to say is that we're not in a post-racial society. We are still in a racial society, and we need to begin to move towards one, the human race. I was in Indianapolis, Indiana, in 1960 when the sit-ins began. Just as Dan said, I had done a tour in the United States Army, and I didn't tell them to assign me to special services, psychological warfare attached to the 82nd Airborne. Just because I had 3 years college, I was assigned to that unit. And that unit is about mental manipulation, about mental conditioning of the enemy, so that you can condition them to want to do the things you want them to do. And I began to say, you know, this is what America does with its own citizens. And then it hit me when the sit-ins began. The next day, Mr. Roy Wilkins, the executive director of the NAACP, asked for all branches of the NAACP, youth council, and everything else to support the sit-ins in the South by carrying on picketing in the North and these stores in the North. And Lord behold, there was a big one-page advertisement by a group of black ministers in Indianapolis and the Indianapolis Star condemning the sit-ins in the South.
Walk together, children, hold together, weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land.
Just a minute here. I got it here. Now this is in Freedom of Family. This is in Freedom of Family. Thank you, Jim. This is the FBI categorization of me that's in their files. A subversive, prior acts or conduct or statements indicating a propensity for violence and antipathy toward good order and government. Now, what I don't understand, again, if this was part of my FBI file, why in the world was I allowed to take the Florida bar and pass it? Monica, I think I was a mole and didn't even know it. Maybe they just wanted to see who my associates were and what have you. But anyway, that has been my record. And I'm talking to you young folks as you move forward in your life. I know you have tremendous bills you have to pay when you graduate. Now, I arranged when I was getting ready to go to A&M University to go to the local college to stay with my grandparents for the first 2 or 3 years so I wouldn't have to pay all those bills. And then later, when I still ran out of money to stay at A&M University, that's when I volunteered, Jim, for the Army. And I had no real love. Dan. I mean, Jim, I'm sorry, Dan. I had no love for the red, white, and blue. I just wanted to have some money to go to school. These are the kind of decisions that you have to make because you don't want to sell yourselves to the company store. Yet, at the same time, there's an opportunity to make some changes within the power structure. I would like to move on from the days of the sit-ins and the freedom rides to the kind of institutional racism that Stokely Carmichael talks about, which is that although there is no alleged intent to discriminate against you because of race. However, the practices and the policies of the institutions result in difference because it's a business necessity. It's not about race, allegedly. And these are the kind of problems that even an attorney is hard to change because of the constitutions of the U.S. courts today and in the near future. So you need to find ways to use your knowledge as a lawyer in other areas. I like to call myself not as a civil rights lawyer, but a freedom movement lawyer. That's the difference. Because civil rights is always defined by the power structure as to what civil rights are. I hope if you are a law student or if you're not a law student, read Professor Derek Bell dealing with critical race theory. Critical race theory is a proposition that any rights that blacks have been able to achieve are what he called, they are a fortuity because they would not happen unless it benefits the power structure. Civil rights must benefit the white power structure before blacks earn any results. Now, this was proven in Mississippi, wasn't it, Miss Sim? Yes. Because when Bobby Kennedy was the Attorney General for his brother, he has served as the General Counsel for Senator Eastland's Intelligence Committee. So he understood the ways of the CIA of contain and change, control the people that you want to put into power. And he assumed that if we can convince the civil rights organizations to stop the freedom rides that was embarrassing the country, the sit-ins that were embarrassing the country in its war against communism, let's give them some money to do voter registration. That way we'll get them off the streets. And as Miss Simmons knows, some of the snake people, like Diane Bevel Nash, she's from Chicago. That's where Mr. Daly plays the game. So no, we can't take none of this money. But Bob Moses and Aaron Henry and all those others knew that voter registration raised as much hell as anything else, you know. And of course, you know the rest of the story. It eventually did that. So where do we go from here? I hope you have a chance to read that book by Martin Luther King entitled, Where Do We Go From Here? Because in 1967, he made a speech that nobody in the movement, many in the movement, wanted him to talk about when he said, we need to be concerned about the war in Vietnam. That is an unholy war. He also talked about poverty. You see, a lot of blacks say, no, we don't have time to talk about poverty and Vietnam, you know. We got to stay on message. Of course, you know, his lieutenants knew that when Dr. King made that statement about Vietnam, he was already marked. You know, the whole family of the King family realized that's when he became marked. And then, of course, he went to Memphis to support the sanitation workers. I am a man. I am somebody. And we always, every January the 15th, we celebrate I Have the Dream speech. Nobody celebrates the speech he made in Memphis, Tennessee, when he said, America is going to hell. America is going to hell. And his last speech was, I've been to the mountaintop. In other words, people, we are in deep doo-doo. We need to understand what happened with Patricia and the others who decided to take a stand against all that culturalization of accommodation to racism, and decided to sacrifice themselves even if it meant death. You have to do the same for your grandchildren. It's not over. So we're ready for questions as to where do we go from here? Thank you.
A lot of questions.
This is a question for Dr. Due from Ashley Sanderson. Who was the most influential person in your life at the time of the sit-ins? Who were you looking up to?
This question for me.
I know you're Dr. Due, but they didn't call you Dr.
Oh,
Due
that's
tonight.
right, I keep forgetting.
Okay, they call you Attorney Due tonight. Okay, so I guess she wants me to answer that one.
Yes.
Okay, it's okay. We get a little mixed up. There were two important persons in my life, my mother and my stepfather. My mother and stepfather.
Okay.
Next question from Bruce Bellamy. This is for either you, John, or you, Patricia. In your opinion, what impact did the Rosewood saga play in the civil rights movement in Florida? The Rosewood saga.
I think that question can be answered by my wife, but I want to tell you in a couple of minutes. A similar incident took place in southern Indiana involving my grandmother's grandparents over a struggle over a pig that ventured into the property of a German immigrant there in southern Indiana. And there was a big riot that involved 100 white folks, but they were defeated by my foreparents. But the sheriff, different from Rosewood, he provided safe escort along with the governor of Indiana, who set aside land for them to resettle 30 miles further north. And I think the only reason that happened is that my foreparents, being farmers for the market, not just subsistence, were of value commercially. And I'm still doing the research on that. But my wife can answer the rest of it, dealing with Rosewood here.
Oh, okay. What happened in Rosewood was hidden for so long. The people involved didn't want to talk about it. There have been a few books written about it. But what was most interesting to me was when they started having the hearings on Rosewood. I had said I was at the Capitol, and I had said I can't go. I just can't go and listen to what happened. And then all of a sudden, I was at the door to get in. What really surprised me is that everybody was so friendly. The police officers and everybody at the door to make sure nobody went in with the wrong attitude. I was so surprised that they could not see my rage and feel my rage. So I don't know, and as I listened to the testimony, I believe she was about 83 years old. That's how much time had expired. I could not believe that we allowed that to happen in this state. But I know it happens when things happen and people don't discuss it. I mentioned earlier that a young woman named Barbara Broxton was in jail with us for 49 days. I tried to interview her for my book, but she would not talk about her jail time. And I learned that she had not told her children about it. So I guess people have to process their pain in different ways. I believe we have to talk about something to get a solution to it. But Barbara was so active, and when she refused to talk to me, it reminded me of what had happened in Rosewood, the silence that fell over that whole community, and the fact that whites didn't feel that it was a threat to come out. Because I know when I went to that door to hear what had happened from one of the witnesses, and I'm not usually full of rage, but that day I was. I was full of rage, and I tried to talk myself out of going because it would be difficult for me, and it was difficult, but I sat there.
Pat, I just wanted to add that when the movie Rosewood came out, I was teaching high school in Bronson at the time, and that's the largest town near Rosewood. And when I talked to some of my black friends, people in their 60s and 50s, they were not going to go see that movie. The pain still lingers. It never goes away. Never does.
Yeah.
This is to both of the Dews, and it's from Kali Blunt. We know how J. Edgar Hoover's COINTELPRO stymied the evolution of the domestic civil rights movement and the Black Power movement from becoming an international human rights movement. Did you personally experience direct effects of COINTELPRO? And how do you see the building wave for democracy and human rights in the Arab world as being parallel or kindred to the civil rights movement in the U.S.? And he thanks you for your service.
Want me to start with?
Okay, you want to talk first?
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I think the role of the FBI in the COINTELPRO program was part of the insanity America was in, beginning with the Russian Revolution in 1917, that lasted to 1988, when I think we need to understand you can't just blame the FBI and John Edgar Hoover. This is what the system does. I had a case involving a child in high school where the information against him was when he was in the first grade, and he was involved in a situation on the bus that was put into the management information system that was used against him later when he was in high school. So the system maintains, not just the FBI, the system, the power structure maintains a management information system on your behavior, which can be used against you later in life. There's a big move right now in St. Augustine to remove the so-called arrest records of the participants in the civil rights movement, erase them from the records, in St. Johns County. But Dr. Nunn will let you know that the judge always has the FBI record. That doesn't remove the arrest from the FBI records. And if you say you had never been arrested, you had what? Told a lie. So don't think it's just John Edgar Hoover and he's dead. There's always going to be an information system while you're here at the university.
Well, a little closer to home, I guess. We each have a 400-page FBI record, separate. Well, one advantage of John's record was that I found out where he was at certain times. The FBI knew more about his whereabouts. No, seriously. They knew more about his whereabouts than I did. And then, of course, by the time we could get those records, they had scratched out so much.
They're blacking it out.
Yes, so that they would
So
say,
we know
oh,
who it was.
somebody says you love money and you did everything for money, but then they don't say who that was. But in terms of the recent situation in Egypt, I think someone asked a similar question earlier today. I know things have been going on a long time, and actually I don't think we can compare the situations because we're still fighting for freedom. And it took them, some people in Egypt have been fighting too, but basically the big push took less than a month. So it's a little different. You have the internet, and you have different objectives too. It's not, when we say we all want freedom, this may mean different things to different people. Someone asked a question about the freedom songs and how do you feel when people all over the world perhaps sing, we shall overcome. Well, we know that those songs get your attention, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you mean the same thing. I don't believe that, and whenever I hear the songs, I'm hoping that the people singing them really know what it means to us. When I say to us, I mean those of us here in the United States, because we are still singing, we shall overcome. We have got to stop reinventing history. You know, we think we have, you open up the schools, you open up the political arena to some degree, then you find out that it's happening all over again. So evidently it just never stops, but I think it's difficult to compare not only countries but continents in terms of what and how people do things. But then again, if we had had the internet system, what do you think would have happened, honey?
Probably wouldn't be here tonight.
Where would you be?
Not too far here in another county, state prison.
Okay. Should we go to the next one?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
Next question from Deanna Dawkins. This is for Patricia. In your book, you describe the experience of going to court for trying to buy food at Woolworth. You mentioned that your sentence gave you the choice of paying $300 or going to jail for 60 days. You chose jail. Did anyone try and talk you out of it?
Yes, my parents. Yes, although they were the ones who taught me about my right to be involved in my responsibilities, it was different. By this time, my father was a high school principal, and they put pressure on him to get us out of jail. There were two of us, and all the publicity the state didn't like. And it was difficult for him. It was difficult for my mother because she was born in Quincy, and she had heard about the lynchings and the way people were treated in this part, in that part of the state. So she didn't want her children in jail either. I don't think any of the parents wanted their children in jail, but we told them we had to do it, and we would, and if they had, then we wouldn't be in that position then.
We have such wonderful questions, and we're really trying to see, can we combine some of them, because we don't have the kind of time. We could really be here till quite late. But questions to either or both. Nowadays, thousands, and no name, by the way, was given on this one. Nowadays, thousands of undocumented immigrants struggle and fight for equality and opportunities. They really work hard for these. Is it safe and appropriate to say that the immigration reform movement is the modern day civil rights movement? Why or why not?
When I saw Dr. Ortiz, I asked him whether or not they found General Gomez lately, who took a few dollars from the United States Army to sell, Mexico, Arizona, New Mexico, and Southern California. And then they put him on the boat to Spain. So really, we're on, Mexican territory or Indian territory. Since I'm part Cherokee, y'all need to go back to Europe. I really think that, immigrants were welcomed before the Civil War, particularly from Ireland and Germany and what have you. But all of a sudden, they're treated like non-persons when they're doing the work. Some of you may think they're taking jobs from other people, black people. I don't necessarily think that. I think it is another, not civil rights, by the way. It's a freedom movement where we need to think about being one people.
Next question for either of you, or both. This is from Pierce Butler. Your views on Barack Obama.
One minute. Okay. He can dance.
Well, after leaving the inauguration in 2009, I realized how much time and energy I had put into his election. We live in Gaston County. I think we had about 15 signs along our fence line. And still, we have signs on our cars, which I usually never did. I think what people don't understand is that it takes time to go into any kind of office and do the best that you can do. And I also think before the election, a lot of people said, oh, he's not black, he's half white. But now I think they're saying, oh, he's black. and it's a shock. How can we have a black president? Did I do this? What's wrong with me? Well, I never understood it when I heard that he was not black, because he's about as dark as I am. I think we should be proud of ourselves for electing a man who is intelligent, who is passionate. We don't have to agree with everything. I don't agree with everything with him. I mean, sometimes education In the education issues, I disagree. And I certainly disagree if he's talking about entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and all of these things. And I'm just hoping he can, I hate to say play the game, but you know, sometimes politics is a game. You do have to give and take. And I think he's doing a good job myself. But we'll wait and see what happens with the budget and see what the final budget will be. And I'm just hoping it will be in the interest of the neediest people, children, senior citizens, people who are ill and who need health care. I like the man.
I think this is a great question. Hopefully we have quite a few of our students still here. How can young people move the movement forward today?
Okay.
And that's from Gainesville Women's Liberation Representative.
Now, which one did you want to?
You want both? I hope.
No, I'm saying, how can young people, right, I'm sorry, it's for Patricia. How can young people move
I want to talk on this.
movement forward today?
Can I also talk on that?
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Okay.
Basically, the youth that do not necessarily have to follow the example that we did, but as you go into the system, you need to be the best you can be, and so that you'll be able to impress the managers of the system that they can do the right thing. I learned this when I was in elementary school. I had an opportunity to participate on the radio show, Why Should We Hire the Handicapped? And I thought, doing research, first time I'd done research, it would be, the moral thing, the religious thing, what have you. And I found that it is good business to hire the handicapped. They are more dedicated, they're involved, history has shown they are the best workers. And therefore, I think young people need to understand it's more about just wages and hours and working conditions. 1199, I'm talking to you now. It's about managing the business. My wife has been to several rehab centers, and the doctors don't know what they're doing. It's the people there on the floor that have to be concerned about the health of the people that they're working with. So you, young people, need to learn the business or what you're getting into so you can help your employer to do the right thing.
Excuse me, what was the question again?
How can young people move forward with a movement today?
Oh, he was talking about my being in rehab and.
I was talking at 1199, honey.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just think young people have to start where they feel comfortable. And people always, how can I do what you did? You don't have to do what we did. It's important to help your peers. If you're good in math, help tutor someone. Just start where you can feel comfortable. You should register, you should vote. And you know what else, and this is a little off the point, but I want to say it. You should document what happens in your family. You should find out who your parents are, who your grandparents are. I interviewed my mother any number of times, and I still have questions. And that's one way we can find out, what are we going to do? What are we going to bring to the table? How are we going to make a difference? Now, in terms of that rehab, I had mentioned earlier about my drinking all of this water. All of you, first of all, should take care of yourselves. I guess I'm the first one to say I was so busy saving the world, I didn't try to save myself. Well, because you get so busy, you don't take care of yourself. Now, for men and women, have your thyroids checked. It's really important. And I know you may be like me when someone mentioned thyroid. I said, thyroid, where is the thyroid? I was pretty dumb. But I found out that I have thyroid cancer, which punctured my lungs, fractured my back, and cracked my bones. And, you know, for a while I couldn't walk, and the rehab wasn't for alcohol or drugs. It was, oh, you know how it is. So, although I guess, you know, you could assume whatever you wanted to, but after my surgery a year ago, January 6th, I could not walk because of the damage. And thyroid is a slow-growing cancer. Thyroid cancer is slow-growing. And wherever it goes into your body, it remains thyroid cancer. So I've been given radioiodine treatments. I've had 2. Don't worry, nothing will happen to you. Now, I'm safe. But I would like to leave that little health message with you. Check your thyroid, men and women, and it runs in families.
Thank you. That's going to do it for the questions. What we're going to do now is Dr. Simmons and I are just going to sort of make an observation, kind of a wrap-up of what we've heard tonight from the Dews and from, of course, the audience. I was stimulated by a question I didn't get to ask, so I'll just read it and then I'll comment on it. It says, what do you think the students here today can do to continue the work you have done? Well, immediately I thought, wait a minute, it's not just students, it's faculty. And when I was a student here at the University of Florida in the 60s, the most powerful coalition we had was when the faculty and the students worked together. The students risked maybe their student status. The faculty members risked their faculty status. Some of them were fired. But this powerful combination I saw in action a couple of years ago, and it was Justice for Kofi. And I remember being in Turlington Plaza when this took place. And I saw the students gather, and the students were looking around, and another student got up, and another student got up. But there were faculty members there, and they took the stage. And once that powerful combination took place, that's when we all realized we had something going for us we weren't going to waste. And we went down to University Avenue, and we marched down to the Alumni Association, and we spoke directly and demanded of the Board of Trustees that they do something about this situation, and it was effective. So my wrap-up would be, we've got a powerful combination when the faculty and the students unite and see a common cause. It's not just the students, it's not just the faculty, it's the fact that they can work together in a very powerful way.
Community. Thank you. Will you carry my bag?
Well, I think that most of us in this room know, and it was said by one of you earlier, that we're not in a post-racial society, as some of us had hoped and maybe wished was the case after the election of Barack Hussein Obama. But even worse than us not being in a post-racial society, in my view, we are seeing a retrenchment of many of the things that the Dews and the civil rights and peace and women's activists and all of the people who have worked for so many years to make democracy a reality in America. One of the things that you were mentioning, how people are brainwashed And often, I've learned from my students and others that people really don't know how democracy came to America. It really did not come with the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. It came from people like us in this room expanding democracy to include people who were never thought of when the Constitution was penned or the Declaration of Independence was written. It certainly didn't include women. It did not include any people of color. African Americans were slaves, etc. We fought to make America what it is. And I believe that we are in a period of retrenchment where these things that we fought for are being eroded. And we need a movement. We have to have a people's movement or we will lose what we have gained over 200-300 years of struggle. I regularly read Bob Herbert, and I recommend him to you, a columnist in the New York Times. And he wrote an article on February 11th titled, "When Democracy Weakens." And he talks about how he sees our democracy weakening. And he was reflecting on what was going on in the Middle East, particularly Tunisia and Egypt, and how these students and old people, young people, women, these people put their bodies on the line. 300 were killed. It was not that easy, and a lot of work had gone on before. So I think as we wrap up and look at this movement, this most recent movement for civil rights, for human rights, for women's rights, for people's rights across the board that we have heard and talked about tonight, we must build a movement, people, in this country today. And many of us in this room are engaged in movements. We need to unite these movements in the kind of struggle that we had during the 60s and 70s. Of course, it will be different, but it has to be. That's the only way we get it.
No peace, no justice. No peace, no justice. No justice.
No peace.
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 All right, before we leave, we're almost finished with the program. If you could just stay for one moment, we do want to make a special presentation. And real quickly, also, please remember to fill out the surveys and win an opportunity, a possibility of winning a signed copy of Freedom in the Family, and also the question cards. We realize due to the wonderful turnout tonight, most of the questions were not raised. However, we're going to work to compile these questions and actually mount them on the Oral History Program website so that we can continue to build momentum and do the work that Dr. Simmons has encouraged us to do. Right now, we do have a special presentation for our honored guests, and I'll let Dr. Russell Brown lead that.
On behalf of the Center for the Study of Race Relations, on behalf of the Center for the Study of Race and Race Relations and the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, we'd like to present this plaque to Dr. Due and Attorney Due, and I'd like to read it to you as we present it to them. It says, presented to Dr. Patricia Stephens Due and Attorney John Due for their outstanding and lifelong fight for justice. University of Florida, Center for the Study of Race and Race Relations, and Samuel Proctor Oral History Program, February 16, 2011. Please join me.
Thank you again so much for joining us. Please continue these conversations about movement building across generations. I also really want to thank the Dues. They actually spoke earlier with a very substantial group of University of Florida students. Anytime we can get them here, we'd love to have them. Hint, hint. Thank you again to Dan Harmling and Zahar Simmons for being wonderful moderators.
Who are you? My name is Joe
And a final thank you to our co-sponsors. Again, please turn in your surveys. The program will be posted on the Bob Graham Center website. It will be archived, and so you can continue sharing it. Thank you so much.
Walk together, children, home together, weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together, children, home together, weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Going to mourn and never tire, mourn and never tire. Walk together, children, home together, weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together, children, home together, weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Walk together, children, home together, weary. There's a great camp meeting in the promised land. Going to mourn and never tire, mourn and never tire. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free. Truth shall make us free someday. Deep in my heart, I do believe. Truth shall make us free someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall